Hello, welcome to Thor Talk, the show all about Marvel's resident god of thunder. On this episode of Thor Talk, we will be looking at the complete history of Thor's goats, Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder. We'll see how they went from bird noises to movie stars on Thor Talk.
I am Thor the Thunderer, son of Odin, prince of Asgard, and this world is under my protection.
Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder, like Thor himself, were brought into Marvel Comics from Norse mythology. In the Norse myths, Thor has a chariot that is pulled by two goats called Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder, as stated in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda. Thor og hovra twa svå heta Toothgnasher og Toothgrinder, og reitå han ekker en havranir draga reidna. Thor has two he-goats that are called Toothgrinder and Toothgnasher, and a chariot that he drives, and the he-goats pull the chariot. Now, flying goats seem like a rather odd creature to pull a thunder god through the skies, but there is actually a very interesting reason for this. There is a bird called a snipe, and it was commonly believed that when it flew by, then a storm would soon follow. During courtship, the snipe vibrates its tail feathers to produce a sound known as drumming or winnowing, which sounds a lot like the bleating of a goat. In fact, one of the German names for the snipe is Himmelsziege, or sky goat. So it seemed to people that flying goats were bringing storms with them as they flew across the sky, and this led to the belief that the thunder god was accompanied by goats. Thor's goats appear in the two main sources of Norse mythology, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. The goats appear in two poems of the Poetic Edda, but their names are never given. In Hymiskvida, Thor and Tyr journey on the goats from Asgard to the home of someone named Egil, and leave the goats in Egil's care. Later, when they begin the journey home, one of the goats collapses, and Thor sees that it has a lame leg. The narrator states that Loki is responsible for this. In the poem Thrumskvida, Thor and Loki take the goats to go to Jotunheim to take back Thor's stolen hammer. The goats also appear in Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda. In one section describing Thor, the goats' names are given and their role is described. Later in the text, Snorri describes how one of Thor's goats received a lame leg. Thor and Loki are traveling and stop at a farmer's house. Thor provides food for the farmer's family by killing, skinning, and cooking his goats. Thor tells the farmer's family to cast the bones onto the goat's skin, and he resurrects them the next day. However, the farmer's son breaks one of the bones to eat the marrow inside, and one of the goats has a lame leg when it's resurrected. Thor is enraged when he sees this, and the terrified farmers offer the service of his children as compensation. Thor cools down upon seeing how terrified the family was, and agrees to take the children as servants. So Thor can kill, eat, and completely restore his own goats as long as their bones are intact. Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder are fairly important to Thor in the Norse myths, so it's no surprise that they were adapted to the Marvel Comics. In the Marvel Comics, Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder first appeared in Thor Annual No. 5, which was published in 1976. This means that it took 14 years after Thor's first appearance in 1962 for his goats to be introduced. This is probably for a few reasons. First of all, Marvel didn't draw too heavily on elements from Norse mythology in their earlier years. For example, despite their relatively late introduction, Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder were actually introduced years before several other important elements of Norse mythology, like Odin's spear Gungnir and Odin's ravens Hugin and Munin. Another reason for their late introduction is that they didn't really serve a necessary function for Marvel's Thor. This Thor can fly and create portals, so he doesn't really need goats to get around. Thor Annual No. 5 tries to rectify this by presenting them as being more for Thor's entertainment. A segment about Thor's daily life describes how Thor takes to the skies on his chariot drawn by male goats when peacetime becomes too stifling. So he uses them for fun when there's nothing else to do. Later in the issue, another use is provided as Thor and a group of Asgardian warriors head for Greece. They use the Bifrost to get to Earth, and from there, Thor's goats take them to Athens. While Thor can fly, not everyone else can, and Thor can use his goats to transport others, as he does here. 7 years later, the goats had their second appearance in Walter Simonson's Thor number 339. After forging Stormbreaker, Thor, Beta Ray Bill, and Sif hear news that Bill's people are under attack. The journey is long, and Bill says they will need provisions and fears they will not reach them in time, so Thor calls Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder. The two goats answer their master's summon and pull Thor's chariot into battle with blazing speed. In the next issue, the goats get them there in time to save Bill's people and bring the victorious warriors back to Asgard. Walter Simonson would go on to use the goats a few more times in his legendary Thor run. In Thor number 343, they are sent by Odin to Thor as a sign of his blessing, and Thor rides them into battle when he faces the dragon Fafnir. In Thor number 360 to 362, Thor leads a band of Asgardians into Hell to reclaim mortal souls that Hela stole, and his goats take him on this 9-day ride. Thor challenges Hela in hand-to-hand combat, but she kills anyone she touches, so Thor takes his iron gauntlets out of a compartment in his chariot and uses them to help him defeat Hela. After acquiring the souls, Thor leads the charge with his goats as the Asgardians escape Hell. With Bifrost being destroyed at the time, Thor's hammer and chariot are needed to return to Earth, so Thor hitches all the wagons containing the souls to his chariot and goes to Earth where he returns them. In Thor 363, Thor takes his Belt of Strength out of his chariot's locker and uses it to fight Curse. Finally, Thor 364 to 366 sees Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder get the clearest portrayal of their personality, since they actually speak. Thor is transformed into a frog by Loki, and after some adventures he finds his way back to his chariot. His goats have been patiently waiting in the alley for their master to return, and are willing to wait as long as is necessary. Despite Thor being a frog, they immediately recognize him, and refer to him as Lord Thor. Toothgnasher even comes up with a solution to Thor's problem by suggesting he use Mjolnir, and Frog Thor then rides to Asgard, where he has his frog curse removed. Here we get a pretty clear picture of the goats' personality. They are extremely loyal to Thor, and fairly intelligent as well. They even know what an American Express card is. Somehow. Thor 366 would end up being their last appearance in Walter Simonson's run, and I think it's interesting how Simonson makes them useful for Thor. Rather than being used for leisure like they were in their first appearance, here they are used almost exclusively for battle. They are presented as being a bit faster than Thor, or just being better suited for long journeys. Finally, the chariot that they pull is useful in carrying things, such as Thor's equipment and several wagons of mortal souls. The simplest way to describe how Simonson uses them is calling them Thor's horses. They are loyal creatures that Thor rides into battle or for long journeys, and are never seen doing anything outside of this role. And yet they fulfill that role very well. Thor's loyal goat's next appearance was in New Mutants number 84 to 85 by Louise Simonson, who is actually the wife of Walter Simonson. When the children of Volstagg learn that Hela is planning to invade Asgard, they can't get anyone to believe them, so they go to the fields of Asgard where Thor's goats are grazing. They explain things to Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder and beg them for help in getting to Balder. The goats believe them and let the children ride them. Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder then take the children to Balder, who then helps Asgard drive off Hela. This isn't a very long appearance, but it shows that they have a life outside of being attached to Thor's chariot, and apparently they're also good with kids. They make a brief appearance in Marvel Superheroes number 5, where Thor's brother Vidar rides them into battle. Interestingly, they appear to be brown rather than white in this issue, and would be the same color in their next appearance, the 1991 Marvel Holiday Special. During the Viking Age, a group of sailors is trying to get home in time for the midwinter feast, but is lost in a storm, and a woman in their village prays to Odin for their return. At the same time, a troll threatens to destroy Asgard with a meteor. Odin has Thor collect the finest foods in Asgard and destroy the meteor at a specific time. Thor does so, and the destruction of the meteor causes a star to appear in the sky, which guides the lost sailors home. Odin, meanwhile, sneaks into their houses and leaves behind Asgard's finest foods and wines for the midwinter feast. The sailors get home, and they see Odin and Thor's goat-drawn chariot, wishing a good midwinter to all. So that's the story of how Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder became the inspiration for Santa's reindeer. They would next appear in Thor Volume 2 number 30 by Dan Jurgens, where Balder uses them to get a potion to Hogun. Next, they would appear in issue 40, where they pull Odin in their chariot as he faces Surtur in battle. They charge at Surtur, and there's an explosion that leaves Odin, Surtur, Toothgnasher, and Toothgrinder dead. Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder presumably regenerate, and next appear during the Ragnarok storyline in Thor Volume 2, number 83. Mjolnir was destroyed earlier in this storyline, so Thor needs his goats for transportation. This is the first time Thor has ridden his goat-drawn chariot since Simonson's run nearly 20 years ago. After Thor goes on a mystical journey, he returns to find that Loki has killed and eaten Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder and broken all their bones so they won't regenerate. Only the aftermath is shown, and it would be a couple of years before they returned again in Journey into Mystery number 623 by Kieran Gillen, where we finally learn their origin. A young Thor was envious of the elves' cavalry and thought that he should have a mount worthy of Thor. Loki told him that the value of a steed is in the difficulty of breaking it, and that's why a stubborn stallion is valued more than a pony. So he suggests that Thor seek out the most stubborn of beasts in order to have the most impressive steed. Since goats are among the most stubborn creatures, Thor chooses Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder, the lords of all goats. Thor tries all summer to tame them, but is unsuccessful, so he has a dwarf forge a bridle that can break any beast. Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder are brothers, so neither will bend the knee to anyone while the other is free. So Thor binds them both at the same time, and they agree to serve Thor. Loki's intentions in advising Thor are revealed when Thor returns riding two massive goats, and the people of Asgard laugh at the sight. However, eventually the goats would gain the respect of the people of Asgard. Kid Loki would use them to escape Asgard in Journey into Mystery number 624, and to pull out Volstagg in issue 630. Kieran Gillen portrays Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder as being ancient, proud creatures that act only if they want to. Despite Thor's efforts, he can't tame them. And even when he has a magical bridle that can tame any beast, they refuse to bend the knee until he manages to bind both of them. And Kid Loki is always very respectful and is always sure to compensate them with food. Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder would have some minor appearances following Gillen. In Vengeance number 4, Kid Loki has Toothgnasher assist him in a fight, and states that Toothgnasher is the more temperamental of the two goats. The two goats pull some Asgardians into battle in Exile number 1, young Thor rides them out of Apocalypse's ship in Uncanny Avengers number 6. However, Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder would get their most appearances in Jason Aaron's Thor run. In fact, they make about as many appearances in Jason Aaron comics as they do in all other comics combined. The reason for this is simple. Aaron's Thor needs his goats for transportation. Much of Jason Aaron's Thor run follows young Thor and unworthy Thor, both of whom do not have Mjolnir, and so they cannot fly. As such, they need flying goats to get around. Though not all of the goats' appearances are when Thor doesn't have Mjolnir. In Thor God of Thunder the Accursed, Thor rides Toothgnasher into battle alongside the members of the League of Realms as they journey throughout the 9 realms to stop Malekith. In this case, the reason that Aaron chooses to have Thor ride Toothgnasher is probably so that he can fit in with the other members of the League of Realms, who are all riding fantasy creatures. In Original Sin number 5.1 to 5.5, Thor and Loki ride the goat-drawn chariot to get to Heaven, the 10th realm. The reason for their use is probably that it's a long and difficult journey to get through the realms. Later in the story, Loki uses them himself while Thor is captured, and immediately following this story, Thor becomes unworthy of Mjolnir. This kicks off a long string of goat appearances, since, again, Thor needs them to get around. However, rather than have them both pull him in his chariot, he instead often opts to ride a single goat. Thor also almost exclusively uses Toothgnasher over Toothgrinder. He rides Toothgnasher into battle to stop Malekith in Thor Volume 4 number 1, and uses him again to get around in issue 6, where he tells Toothgnasher not to eat Agent Coulson. Toothgnasher is very prominent in the Unworthy Thor miniseries, where he acts as Thor's transportation, takes on supervillains such as Ulik the Rock Troll, and retrieves Thor's axe. Toothgnasher also accompanies Thor in Mighty Thor number 19, Mighty Thor number 21, Mighty Thor number 23, and Generations Thor. All these appearances provided some much needed exposure for Toothgnasher, but unfortunately left Toothgrinder in the dust. Toothgrinder does make a few sparse appearances during this time. However, this is usually just when Thor decides to use both goats, such as in Angela, Asgard's Assassin number 1, Thor Volume 4 number 7, and Loki, Agent of Asgard number 10. In Thor number 700, both goats even make an appearance, set billions of years into the future, showing that the goats stick around for quite a while. Toothgrinder did make one solo appearance in Black Bolt number 9, where he accompanies Thor to the Absorbing Man's funeral. Toothgnasher's prominence would come to an end, in the worst way possible, in Thor number 700. Toothgnasher was left to guard the War Thor's hammer, but when the hammer went to Volstagg and turned him into the War Thor, Toothgnasher chased down the War Thor and crashed into him, sending him flying, but then quickly raced to his defense when Mangog appeared. Toothgnasher bravely charged at Mangog, a villain strong enough to defeat Odin, but Mangog killed him by tearing off his head. After this, Toothgrinder would take his brother's place as Thor's main companion. In Thor number 702, Thor comforts Toothgrinder over their loss, and in the following issues, Toothgrinder would join in the fight against Mangog. After defeating Mangog, Thor would begin to live in a boat which he named Toothgnasher after his fallen friend. In Thor Volume 5 number 1, Thor returns to the boat called Toothgnasher with a dead shark and gives it to his pet hellhound, Thori. Toothgrinder and Thori temporarily fight over the shark, but then everyone on the boat is transported to Niflheim. In the next issue, Thor is driving a monster truck, but they are soon attacked, so Thor has Toothgrinder take the wheel while he goes to deal with their pursuers. Later on, Toothgrinder defeats the dinosaur steed ridden by Tyr. In Thor number 8, Thor allows himself to be captured by the angels of heaven, and has Toothgrinder, Thori, and Warsong break him out. The angels are on a similar level to the Asgardians, so Toothgrinder's mouthful of feathers here is pretty impressive. In issue 14, Thor has the Fantastic Four go back in time and bring his past self to the present to help in the War of the Realms. Thor doesn't think his younger self will easily trust the Fantastic Four, so he sends back someone he knows young Thor will trust, Toothgrinder. Having Toothgrinder there is enough to convince young Thor, and he would go on to ride Toothgrinder into the battle. In Thor number 16, Thor becomes king of Asgard, and balance is at last restored to the universe when Loki resurrects Toothgnasher as a coronation present. It is unclear how Loki was able to do this, but Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder are finally reunited as Aaron's run comes to a close. Aaron left his own imprint on the goats. While Simonson portrays the goats as Thor's loyal battle steeds, and Gillen portrays them as willful creatures who serve Thor, Aaron portrays them as Thor's pets. He pets them, feeds them, plays fetch with them, and even tries to keep them from eating food that is bad for them. He also gives the goats more jobs outside of just giving him a ride, such as guarding a hammer, driving a monster truck, breaking him out of prison, and providing backup in battles. Toothgnasher has yet another appearance in Punisher Kill Crew, where the Punisher finds him and offers him food to help hunt down a frost giant who killed people during the War of the Realms. Toothgnasher pulls the Punisher's van throughout the realms and helps him succeed in his mission. With his mission complete, the Punisher parts with Toothgnasher and calls him a good boy. This is very interesting, because not only is it objectively correct that Toothgnasher is a good boy, but this is also probably one of the highest compliments that Frank Castle has ever given to anyone ever. Finally, in Hulk Volume 5, Number 8, Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder take Iron Man from Asgard back to Earth, with their designs being very similar to the ones found in Thor Love and Thunder. This comic came out after the movie, so their designs were based on the movie rather than the other way around. As of the time of this video, this is the last major appearance of either of the goats, and after looking at the goats' complete history, we can create a profile of Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder. They usually reside in the green pastures of Asgard or in their stables, but can be called into battle by Thor from almost anywhere at any time. Thor mainly uses them to ride into battle, to take him on long journeys, and to get around if he cannot fly on his own. The goats can fly at incredibly high speeds and can cross galaxies very quickly. They may even be faster than Thor, or may just be better suited for long distances. They are strong enough to defeat several angels of heaven, to kill a frost giant, and even fight Ulik the rock troll. They can regenerate so long as enough of their bones remain intact, and can even come back from having their flesh completely disintegrated. They are intelligent, stubborn, food-motivated, and extremely loyal to Thor. Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder's history also extends beyond the main Marvel universe. In the universe of the Pet Avengers, Toothgnasher accidentally chips off a sliver of Mjolnir, and Puddle Gulp the Frog picks it up, which creates Frog Mjolnir, the hammer of Throg. In Thor the Mighty Avenger, they are a bit different from their main incarnation, in that they do not originally belong to Thor. They are summoned by blowing the Buke horn, and each person can only ever summon them 3 times before they must pass the horn on. Fandral is the owner of the Buke horn in Thor the Mighty Avenger number 4, and he uses them to take his friends to a bar in Britain. This was his 3rd use of the horn, so he then gives the horn to Thor, and Thor uses it to take Jane Foster on a date. In Marvel Zombies Destroy, Odin is infected by a mysterious zombie virus, and since all of Asgard is connected to him, all of Asgard is infected too. A zombified Thor then eats his own goats, but then they come back as zombies. And while zombies usually find the taste of rotten flesh disgusting, goats will eat anything, so they eat zombie Odin before anyone can stop them. The Asgardian zombies were going to use the goats to travel to another universe, but then they are all killed in an explosion caused by Howard the Duck's team. Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder also appear in some mediums other than comics. They make an animated appearance in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes Season 2 Episode 8, The Ballad of Beta Ray Bill. The episode adapts the first few issues of Simonson's run, including Thor, Bill, and Sif riding Thor's chariot to stop Surtur's demons. The goats' role is less important in the episode than in the comic, but it was nice to see them get an appearance. Their video game appearances were even more minor, appearing as decoration in the now-defunct mobile game Avengers Academy. The goats drop the fake muscles item every 4 hours, and this can be used to unlock Loki's Thor costume. Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder were actually pitched to appear in the very first Thor movie. Thor writer Zack Stentz stated that in 2009 he pitched Thor riding into battle in a chariot pulled by Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder, but Kevin Feige looked at him like he was crazy, and the idea was scrapped. Instead, Thor rides into battle on a white horse, which is fitting since he sometimes rode one in the comics before his goats first appeared. Later on, Marvel Studios loosened up a bit creatively, leading to Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder finally making their cinematic debut in 2022's Thor: Love and Thunder. Here, Toothgnasher is a brown goat with twisted horns, and Toothgrinder is a white goat with curved horns, and is often seen sticking his tongue out. This combines some features that were used sometimes to distinguish the goats in the comics. In Aaron's run, Toothgnasher had more twisted horns, and in Thor the Mighty Avenger, one goat was brown and the other was white. The goats also have a habit of screaming, which apparently was inspired by a goat meme of Taylor Swift's I Knew You Were Trouble. In the film, the goats are given to Thor as a gift for saving the people of Indgar, though it's implied that the people of Indgar just wanted to get rid of the goats. Thor takes the goats with him when he leaves the Guardians of the Galaxy to save Sif, and then takes them to New Asgard. When Stormbreaker's Bifrost starts malfunctioning, Thor attaches it to a tour boat and has the goats pull the boat. While the goats fly in the comics, in the movie Stormbreaker creates a rainbow bridge in the air, and the goats run across the bridge to pull the ship. The decision to use a boat rather than a chariot was likely to have more room to carry more characters, and could also possibly be a callback to Thor's boat called Toothgnasher. The goats take them to an omnipotent city in order to recruit gods to fight the God Butcher. When things go wrong, Korg summons them with a whistle, and the goats come to pull Thor's team out. The goat boat then takes Thor's team to the Shadow Realm, where they fight Gore. The goats save Korg and then are transported to New Asgard by Stormbreaker's Bifrost. The goats do not appear for the rest of the movie, but despite their limited role, this appearance jettisoned Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder into the mainstream. Whereas before they struggled to make comic book appearances, they were now appearing as action figures, plushes, keychains, Funko Pops, Lego sets, and even McDonald's Happy Meal toys. It seems that Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder are here to stay, and the world is better for it. Well, that's all for this episode of Thor Talk. I hope you enjoyed this rather long look at Toothgnasher and Toothgrinder. If you couldn't tell, I'm a big fan of theirs, so the chance to talk about them for 25 minutes was great. Anyway, with that being said, see you next time on Thor Talk, where
You behold